Welcome back to the Loud Sound Epicenter podcast. We are back in the summer, thankfully, and we're lucky to be joined by not one but two guests. One regular, of course, being the shaman, Thomas777, and the founder and editor of Terror House Press, Matt Forney. Thank you for joining us on the show. But for today, I wanted to really get into decentralized media because it's a bit of a theme on the show, and it's also some of the things that bring the three of us together. And certainly for me, that kind of got me introduced to this side of the dissident online rights. Now, to start off, Matt, you were someone who, after 2017, I made a mental note to myself and thought that this is a guy who was surrounded by all walks of life during that era and somehow kept a sober analysis of all the cast and crew involved. So the next year you launched Terror House Press, and I was just curious how you got from 2017 to about May in 2018 to found Terror House Press, and what was some of the thought behind it?
I didn't get killed. That was a pretty important step. But to kind of decompress this, 2017 was kind of a change year in my life because I found myself kind of both betrayed by people I thought were my friends, and also kind of forced to get a real job for the first time in years after grifting from being a blogger and online content creator. Didn't work out as well as it had in previous years. So after getting a real job and realizing that the whole online fringe politics really wasn't going to work out so well due to certain events that I'm tired of talking about, and I'm sure people in the audience are tired of hearing about. I was kind of looking around for something to do, and I'm in something of a maybe some of the people in the audience can relate to this, but I've been writing online in some form or another since I was like 21 years old. I started in 2009 with a blog called The Malafide. So to a certain extent, this has kind of defined my adult life. But I never really intended on being like a blogger or a pundit. Like I always wanted to be like a novelist or something like that. And around the end of 2017, a writer named Richard Power, whose works I had published on my blog around 2015, he emailed me and he said he had written this sort of memoir called, we ended up calling it Letters from a Heartbroken Pervert. And he asked me if I'd be interested in publishing it through my website because he didn't really want to have a public profile. You know, he's totally anon, and he trusted me to kind of get it out there, you know, through my marketing and publicity skills. And I read the book, read what the excerpts he sent me, and like, this guy's a really good writer. He sort of writes in that sort of Bukowskian delicious tacos-esque vein of someone who's, in dead-end relationships, working in dead-end jobs. He's really good. His work is a bit more shall we say explicit. It's not for everyone, but I was like, this is really damn good. And I was thinking, why don't I start a book publishing company and I make his work the flagship product? I'd be like, I can finally go back and do something that I've always wanted to do my entire life. And this was around the time, if you remember, a website around 2017 called Fluland that was really popular among both, dissident right, frog Twitter types, as well as more traditional alt-lits, apolitical types. Fluland had to kind of wrap up around that time because the guy who ran it was getting stalked by all these crazy left-wing social justice types that didn't like the fact that he was publishing all these right-wing writers. But he was very popular in the time that his website was in operation and proved that there was an audience for writing that wasn't all this, oh, look at me, I'm a LGBT, wheelchair bound immigrant writing about my struggles as such. And I figured I could do something like that, and I wouldn't have to worry about being in Fluland's position because I'm running under my real name. Go right ahead, dox me. I live in Eastern Europe. If you try and threaten me, I'll just make a couple of phone calls, and you'll be arrested the second you set foot on in whatever country you happen to I happen to be at the time. So, and the name Terror House came about because I was living in Hungary at the time, and I was like, maybe I should come up with something Hungarian as a tribute to the country I happen to be living in. So I'm walking around downtown Budapest, and I passed the Terror House, which is one of the major landmarks in downtown Budapest. It was the during the 30s and 40s, it was the headquarters of the fascist Aerocross Party. And then after the war, it became the headquarters of the AVH, the Communist Secret Police. And I was like, Terrorháza. In English, it means House of Terror. Terror House. It's Hungarian. It rolls off the tongue. People remember it. It's a nice little tribute to where I happen to live. So, Terror House. We started publishing the magazine in 2018. We started publishing books in 2019. And it's been working out so far. People like it, and we've got a nice slate of releases for the rest of the year. I'm happy people are. I'm happy people enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's very encouraging because, from my point of view, my introduction to the writing side of the Dissident Right is people like Thomas and Billy Pratt from Kill the Party, people like that who are just doing their best, just putting out stuff regardless of who reads it. And it's thanks to the internet that I'm able to talk to people like you and Thomas and even be introduced to that type of stuff. It's just I really see sort of the publishing side of this really taking off, especially in the last few months. And I understand it's been building momentum kind of quietly behind the scenes, and but it does seem to kind of be this thankless part of the Dissident Right. And Thomas, I was just kind of wondering because I know you kind of have a similar background in it, but do you kind of see the I don't know the novel side? Because I'm a bit on the outs with the fiction, but where do you kind of seeing that overlap with some of the online right?
Well, I don't want to go too far afield or drop some kind of pedantic history lesson, but what I will say is this, and I was talking to our friend Pete Canones the other day when we were recording about this. In America, and if you want to make an impact culturally, whether you're engaged in a political subculture or whether you're looking for a wider audience, you're kind of limited in the platforms that are going to resonate. Okay, America's different than Europe, and as both you guys can attest to, I'm sure. Okay, really the only kind of sovereign mediums. Walker Percy used that term. The philosophic novelist in America are kind of film and novels. Okay, and like that's changing a bit with film because like Martin Scorsese made a bunch of people upset by saying film's kind of dead. It's become this kind of spectacle-oriented thing that's a kind of passive virtual reality. And I think he overstates it, but he's somewhat correct in that assessment. But if you want to reach people in impactful terms, like the novel is kind of where it's at. Okay, and whatever your notion is. Okay, and obviously that goes kind of, I think on the right in America at least, it attracts more literary types, and it's been that way since the Inner Warriors. Okay, that's why I'm kind of bemused, and not because I'm a fucking snob or something, but just because it's indicative of the fact that even smart people don't have a strong historical sense. I'm kind of bemused when I run into college guys where they act like reading Ernst Younger is something that like they're up on that nobody was up on before. It's like, well, 80 years ago, that's what guys on the right were doing. Okay, I mean, and that's correct. I'm not like putting shade on that, but I think what's ironic, and I made this point before, when these kind of SPLC types, they don't really have a good grasp of their own kind of narrative. They always portray these kind of like right wing guys as these weird, like illiterate, like working people. I mean, that's really lame, to cast people in that light anyway, who may or may not be particularly sophisticated. But that's not the cliche of the right. The cliche of the right is that it's these weird, kind of put out, dispossessed guys who spend too much time reading books and are kind of have literary pretensions. Like Goebbels himself was this kind of guy. Like so was Knut Hamsun. Like Hamsun was he was a Nobel laureate. So I mean, he did make a huge impact. But that wasn't until he was elderly. But so I mean, there's like precedent here, particularly for what we do. Now, that's not why I started writing fiction. I've been writing science fiction since I was a kid. Obviously, because I'm getting old, I'm not particularly clued into what like 20 somethings are into, but like science fiction in like the 80s and early 90s, like when I was a kid and a teen, like it was still very much like a subcultural thing. Okay. I mean, yeah, it had broken through to the mainstream with bullshit like Star Wars and Star Trek, but like hard sci-fi, it was kind of a fringe subcultural thing, but it very much had its own kind of dialogue. Okay. Like, and I mean, in the form of zines and things, but so I started writing science fiction when I was in like 7th grade, and I've never really, my online content, which I started putting out around 97, 98, I never had any notion of trying to publish my fiction because frankly, I didn't think there'd be a market for it. Okay. And like every other guy and his brother is like, oh, I'm going to be a writer. That never even like occurred to me. But when I got plugged in with the fellas at Imperium, who are great friends of mine, and it's a great brand, they'd never published fiction before. And when I dropped the manuscript on my friend over there, he's like, well, he's like, I actually think, he's like, I think there's a market for this. Okay. And there has been. I would have been happy if I just broke even on it. Okay. But it's actually been profitable, and that's dope. Okay. So, I mean, that's how I broke into fiction, and it's, I'm certainly not any kind of literary type. And I hold myself out as like a revisionist author, not as a fiction writer. I'm a revisionist author who writes science fiction. I'm certainly not on the level of guys who who are real kind of literary personages, and I never pretend to be. But I mean, science fiction is unique. I think it's a good platform to convey ideas, in metaphorical terms, like without clubbing people over the head and being pedantic. I mean, if you can tell a good story, that's a good way to introduce people to, conceptual issues. I mean, that's kind of my notion. I don't want to take up too much of the air in the room. But yeah, that's kind of my deal. Best I can sort of explain it.
Yeah, and it was thanks to you that I even discovered people like Shane Stevens and that type of writing. It just seems like a lot of that stuff is a bit overlooked, even though there's no shortage of stuff like that out there if people just are introduced to it. To speak on what Matt said earlier, I think people do use the personalities, the commentator types. That seems to be how people define the right, and rightfully so, because that's kind of what I'm speaking to with the 2017 era. But people like our friend, Thomas Paul Fahrenheit, are constantly reading and writing, and to me, people like him, that is the right. That is kind of the momentum that things seem to be going towards, and not these TV ready newscaster types. Now, I know our one big obstacle for us is, especially with like Telegram recently taking some flack, we're obviously have a limited amount of resources to kind of get this stuff out there. Do you see that becoming a less and less obstacle in the future? Or I don't know, Matt, if you're optimistic or pessimistic about sort of the future of the online landscape for the Dissident Right.
Well, it's a lot easier now because there's and then there's a far bigger market for it now than there was even 5-6 years ago. Thomas has been around for a lot longer than I have, but even like back in 2015, 2014, the market was still heavily tilted towards commentary. Around 2017, 2018 was when you started seeing there was more of a flowering towards the art and literature side of things. Like I named Fluline as an example, but there's now an entire ecosystem. Like you mentioned, Imperium's a great brand. You have Antelope Hill, Mystery Grove. They're more tilted towards nonfiction, but even then, Mystery Grove focuses, on historical memoirs of the, Storm of Steel, the Peter Kep trilogy, Always with Honor, which are technically, historical works, but they're memoirs. You can read them as literature. And then you have things that are not really necessarily ideologically aligned with works like that, but you have houses like Expat Press or literature magazines like Misery Tourism, which are kind of in the same general ecosystem, putting out great literary works on a regular basis. There's an entire ecosystem outside of the general publishing world that is just doing great works on a continual basis. If you're a writer now, you have a better chance at any point, I think, in recent history of being able to find an audience for your work. It's still tough. Don't get me wrong. Like, none of us are going to be retiring to Cabo on our royalties anytime soon, even if you're reasonably famous. But I think there's more of a reason to be optimistic now than at any point since at least I've been around. So there's definitely plenty of reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, and same to you, Thomas. I mean, since you've been at this for a bit longer, I would imagine you to be a lot more pessimistic, kind of seeing a bunch of the different eras of it. But how would you describe sort of how the landscape has changed over the years?
I mean, people lack perspective, and I don't want to sound either like a cantankerous shithead or like some guy who thinks he's some grand old man of shit, because I'm neither of those things. But I make the point to guys again and again. When I started doing this, you basically had the Institute for Historical Review was kind of like our go-to, like guys like me, okay, like young dudes like on the right. Then there was like real hardcore skinhead types who read like the Tom Metzger newsletter, and I mean I did sometimes too. And there was American Free Press, but all told, there's probably nationwide, probably like a couple thousand guys who like identified as like right wing, National Socialist, white power, or in a non-racial sense, just dissident like right. Whether that was like LaRouche guys or whether that was just kind of hardcore Christian guys who were into homesteading. There was quite literally only like a few thousand of us, okay, like at best. I remember H.K. Thompson, when it might have been, I can't remember, it was either Willis Carto and AFP, or it was the final iteration of American Mercury in like 1980. They asked H.K. Thompson, who was Yaki's Confederate, and he was a publishing mogul and an advertising guy. So I mean, he was in a position to know. He was like this Madison Avenue type who also was like an America First far right dude. But they asked him in like 80, 81. They're like, okay, look, like let's say you had like bottomless resources to promote your brand, and you had all the best people to publish, say like a zine or a newsletter or a political circular. He's like, and you had perfect kind of distribution to aware people of it. He's like, okay, like, what do you think the subscription would be like in the best of all possible worlds? Thompson said probably like 200 people. And if you had like anything over like 20 or 30 guys, and they were mostly guys in those days, overwhelmingly so, like subscribing to your zine or whatever, that was considered successful. I mean, I used to get on Usenet on revisionist chat rooms, and there'd be like 8 guys there. Okay, and I mean that was like considered good. Like, oh hey, I got close to 10 people, and I'm not getting me wrong, like that wasn't like a waste of time. I learned stuff from those guys. Okay, and I'd like to think they learned stuff from me, but it seems somewhat ridiculous when I see some young guy who's like, yeah, I've only got like 80,000 followers on Twitter, and like that we're not going anywhere. It's like, dude, like you've got greater distribution and greater ability to aware people of your brand than like corporate media brands did 30, 40 years ago. And you can do it basically like for no cost at all. I mean, that's totally insane. But it's not like a numbers game. I mean, I want to, what I do is got a niche, and that's fine because I'm not running for office and I'm not trying to start a political party or anything like that. My notion was always to change the color of discourse about certain topics, okay, and change the way like my own people like thought about how they were situated historically, and that is happening not because of me, but because of the efforts of a lot of people like me. But that's never going to be something that a million people are into. It's just not. I mean, not because we're so smart, but because it's a niche thing. But it's a niche thing that is disproportionately impactful on the culture, and it's hugely impactful on political life in conceptual terms. And who controls that narrative controls the conceptual parameters of things. Like that's what I am doing. So whether there's like 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people who buy my content, that's not really the metric of it. Now, I mean, some people might be like, "Oh, that's just a cope." It's like, okay, well, whatever. All I can tell you is that today, what I talk about is something that people accept, and not mainstream, but as totally legitimate. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was not the case at all. So we are making an impact. So I'm not wasting my time. I mean, maybe that was too abstract, but that's that's the best way I can kind of explain my notion of this.
Sure. And also, I remember, Thomas, you wrote probably some time now that one of the hangups with the right is you mentioned that right-wing media never had this really big relevant cachet, and it kind of stuck in this kind of fanzine culture, like punk magazine type culture. And the idea that like the writing itself was enough to win people over, and that was kind of the thought process in 2017. I know what people are talking about now, people like in the NRX circles, the idea of localism is being emphasized alongside a lot of this independent alternative publishing. And so do you kind of see, you and Matt, do you kind of see that those two things kind of going hand in hand after that's kind of like the synthesis, learning from the shortcomings of 2017, this kind of not just exclusively online, but also kind of this community aspect too, to show that
I
it's
do.
relevant.
I mean, I do. Yeah, Matt might disagree with me, and I mean, he's in a very different place geographically. But yeah, I that's why I'm always talking about when people are like, hey, what should we be doing? Or when they put shade on me because I'm not like into MAGA and stuff. I'm like, bro, I don't know. Like, go find a woman and get married. Find like-minded guys. Like, educate your kids and like basically secede from Zog. It's like not that fucking hard, and you're accomplishing a lot more by living your life and being like a normal person, like normal in absolute terms, not in like regime terms. You know, I'm like that's what you should be doing, and like the rest kind of takes care of itself, you know. So yeah, that's why I'm always coming back to that point, you know. I mean, yeah, I agree 110%.
Yeah, I pretty much co-signed with Thomas there. Just go out and be a normal person, please. Just stay away from overly online people. It just seems to end poorly no matter who it is. Okay, go out, kiss a girl, get a job, and always love your family, please. Just I'm not going any further into that rabbit hole.
Right, right. And you know, one thing I'm noticing recently, and this goes back to what Matt said again towards the beginning, I feel like what was so refreshing, you know, finding Matt's stuff is the fact that you kind of had every reason to pick favorites in that scene, but the idea that you didn't was a bit of a rarity. And the fact that people today are kind of still falling victim to the same cycle of, like as you said, people who are extremely online in a negative sense, and also using that as like a judgment system to say, okay, this movement's not making it because I saw this thread and this and that. It just seems like a lot of people who condemn a lot of the stuff that's online also validate it with this weird metric system by saying, okay, these people are doing all right and these people aren't. And it's, again, it's all limited in this very linear space. And so I think that's one of the perks of having this localism emphasis, which I really didn't see years ago. And you know, I wasn't as tuned in as others, but it does seem like we're getting desensitized to the personality types, and it's really coming to a head with all of these people just kind of working in the background, which is how it probably was always supposed to be. But I
Well,
don't know.
I've been personally trying to like avoid the online space as much as possible in recent months. Well, it also comes with there's been a lot of stress in my personal life that I really can't get into the details of. It's informing the process by which I've been writing a poetry chapbook, finishing that up over the past couple of years. That will hopefully be ready. First draft will be ready soon, and hopefully it will be out over the summer. But I've been avoiding social media aside from promotion for Terror House and some other stuff, and trying to focus and spend more of my time in the real world or just reading books in general. Because as tried as this can sound, it is kind of poisoning, poisoning the way I think and exciting the less savory aspects of my personality. Because a lot of my online behavior has been kind of framed around that, framed around activating the parts of my personality that I don't really like, the more sadistic elements of my personality. And it's leaked out into actually my relationships with people I know. And has had serious repercussions for people I care about. And that's not a good thing. I've seen that happen over and over again with other people I've seen online. Again, I'm not going to name names, but I've seen this happen again and again and again, and it's part of the reason why I've just kind of checked out of all this. It's not healthy for anyone.
No, for sure. And no one is immune to the negative aspects of the online culture. And I catch myself too, I'm because I spend a lot of time in politics. That's kind of like an opening line to a lot of people. And it's like, if online drama is going to drive a wedge between people I know in real life, then that's probably a moment where I should have some introspection and realize where my priorities are. So I was just talking about that with a friend the other day. It's like, at some point it's really consuming a part of your life that most people probably aren't aware of. So yeah, you're definitely right. And Thomas, you probably have some anecdotes yourself of people that go down the rabbit hole, as Matt said.
I mean, the problem is there's something. I mean, there's all these dumb metaphors that a lot of basic ass people drop about, like, the living life vicariously, through whatever virtual medium. I mean, obviously that's like a trope in like science fiction going back, 80 years, but I mean, it's a real thing. And like, I make that point to people again and again. And most recently there's some weirdos, and like a lot of these guys, I like Academic Agent awared me to this. I'm not going to name the brand because I don't even want to fucking dignify them with that. But these assholes were saying that I'm a quote fed, and they were saying that I'm like Yarvin and implying I hang out with him. Now, anybody who reads my shit knows that, like, I've never had a single nice thing to say about Mr. Yarvin, okay? And it's like, I'm not proud of this, but it's like I'm a convicted felon. Like, when, like, nerdy guys, like, are going and saying, this guy's a fed, it's like, bro, like, do you realize you're living this kind of, like, fake online life where you're, like, calling people feds when, like, in reality, you probably wouldn't know a policeman until you found yourself in custody. And it's like... It's like, even if I was a quote fed, it's like, okay, like what? It's like, what kind of life do you live? You're running around talking about wanting to murder people? Like what? It's like, why do you think you're so fucking dope and you're so like dangerous that like feds are after you? It's like, you're a fucking nobody. You're a loser. So, I mean, there's like stuff like that. And, I mean, it's just like tiresome because it's like again, I mean, and this was exacerbated, I think, by the quarantine, but also like I'm old. So, I mean, it's like, as much as I utilize internet media to kind of promote my own stuff, I always feel kind of weird about being on the internet because, like, it's again, I'm old, but like people, they don't realize they've got this kind of like quasi video game life, and it's like not they've got trouble distinguishing, between like concrete events that are impactful and like things they're just doing online that don't actually involve anything other than events within their own mind. So yeah, I behoove people not to spend too much time on social media because it's not constructive, but also it's, there's a real world out there that, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, the real world and online life, they're not these discrete things that don't, cross contaminate each other, but they are like two different things. And this idea that you're as broke in your sensibilities if you derive your conceptual picture about the world from online as a guy who like does from watching TV. So I mean, this idea, there's a lot of these like quote black pill types who tell me that like I'm wasting my time. It's like, why? Because some like SPLC intern like posts 100 times a day that like everybody hates me. Like but I mean, if that was the case, again, like I said, obviously obviously what I'm saying is somewhat resonant because a large part of my living I make from writing revisionist copy. Somebody's buying it. I don't think it's all policemen trying to set me up for some kind of, I don't know, but beyond that, even if nobody was reading it, what I'm dropping happens to be true, and that's important. And I'm not running an entertainment brand. So, it's, again, like I said, as long as I've got the same sensibility about all my content as I did and do about my fiction brand. As long as I'm not eating a loss on it, I'd be doing it anyway. And if I had to find, other ways to make money, well, I mean, I always do that anyway. So whatever. But I didn't mean for that to deteriorate into a rant. I'm just getting over being ill again, so like forgive me if that wasn't real coherent. But yeah, I mean, it online is toxic. That doesn't mean we should secede entirely because that's self-defeating. But yeah, if it's your primary mode of engagement, not just in your social kind of orbit, but in terms of how you interact with the world, either in terms of putting your content out or anything else, like that's fucked up. And you need to reevaluate if that's the case.
Right. And I see it a lot with my generation specifically. And the critiquing I notice becomes a crutch because if we validate everything that we've been saying on this stream, the fact that the online space is a legitimate space, it's a space that wins people over, wins hearts and minds. But then we go and say, let's not use the online model to judge whether people are lolcows or damaged goods. It sounds like a contradictory statement, but for me personally, it takes a lot for me to really write someone off as totally useless and I can't get anything out of what they're saying. So I don't know if that's exclusive to the internet. I don't know if that's a generational thing. I wanted to segue into how do you think this kind of stuff kind of bleeds into all the different generations? Because that's one of the many aspects that gets kind of put under the microscope. Do you see like Gen Z having a real future in figuring this stuff out, or do they? Because I said on one of my last videos, I believe that Gen X is responsible for murdering music. And so the idea that they kind of inherited, they were given music on a silver platter by the boomers, and they totally neglected it and kind of put their own bad twist on it. So do you kind of see that happening in the online sphere where we don't know exactly how to consume it? We don't know the line between online and real life. Or do you kind of see Gen Z kind of having some being a little more tech savvy in the proper way, in the way that we would like to see in the dissident space?
I want to give it over to you fellas in a minute. I just wanted to throw in. I actually got one of the reasons I like having you and Paul on my podcast, and not just because like I'm kind of a fucking retard with tech stuff, but I like Gen Z. I like Gen Z guys a lot more than I do my own generational coterie. I mean, Gen X, frankly, are like a lot. There's like a real loserish sensibility, like there is. I mean, it's not like the problem with Gen X. It's not that they're like assholes like boomers are so much. It's like that they're just like losers. You know, like I see this in like people like I actually like who like I grew up with. Like there's like this self-defeating like loser mentality, and like they try and put shine on being a loser with this kind of like phony sort of like disengagement. But it's really just kind of like a passive nihilism. I think Zoomers are a lot more engaged with shit. And frankly, like the Zoomers that do have fucked up ideas, like that's not their fault. Okay, like because it's like okay, if you're 22 years old, you've been marinated basically in every social space you've occupied from the time from the time you were an infant. You've been bombarded with toxic ideas, about culture, about the way the sexes relate, about race, about everything you can imagine. And it was not nearly that bad for people my age, just because there was far less ubiquity of regime organs like around you. Your life is a lot less managed. So I've got a lot of hope for Gen Z, honestly, and I don't put shade on them like a lot of people do. And yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at a cultural paradigm shift, and it's going to be young guys who like make that happen. It's not going to be dudes my age. I mean, I think I've got something to contribute, but it's not the way of things. So yeah, that's all I got on that.
Yeah, Matt, I don't know how like your perspective kind of, I don't know. You probably
Boomers are going to masturbate themselves to death unless something is done. They have potential, but someone older than them needs to herd them into a basement, and then I can't say this on YouTube. They have some redeeming qualities, but maybe this is just culture shock because up until this year, I had been out of the U.S. for 5 years. Coming back for some brief visits. I was in South Dakota for 3 days in January. Then I was in Florida for a week in February. Then I was in New York City for a week in March. Something has gone really, really wrong in this country. The Zoomers, I don't get it. I like some of their spunk. They've got there's some nice things about them, like Thomas said. I can't really blame their dysfunction entirely on them. It ain't their fault, but man, they gotta have some direction, some positive direction. Like, please, dear God, please.
Right, and I'll even be the first to admit that a lot of what's going to help Gen Z is copying a page from the previous generations. And so one of the things that's lacking is sort of the incentive for checking out some of these more obscure sites. They are kind of coddled, not just in the sense that everybody's aware of, but in the sense of like information and the way that they use the internet. They may be tech savvy with the top apps on the App Store, but it's not the logistics, the research things that, you know, the thing that really caught my surprise with Thomas is just the wealth of knowledge. I don't really come by that with a lot of people my age. And so ironically, it's a bit of a betrayal, but I do kind of see the previous generations having the blueprint that would help us if we took it, but I'm not sure.
I will say this too, if just let me insinuate something. One thing that what I think of as the old resistance guys like Tom Metzger, I was never like, I mean, I read his newsletter and I knew some of them guys, like the Cash guys and like some Hammer Skins when I was a kid, and like I was friendly with them even if I didn't accept their program 100%. But one thing guys like Metzger were right about, Metzger was always saying, as was Willis Carto, different as they were, like, look, man, we're not Democrats. We're a vanguard movement. That's the way you got to look at it. Like the fact that like most Zoomers are like fucked up and like, you know, don't think about things critically. It's like, well, I mean, it's that way every generation, and we're not trying to sell people on a media brand, and we're not trying to build a voting coalition. I mean, I know there's Paleogon types who, you know, sit around reading Sam Francis and James Burnham and saying that's a defeatist attitude because we just got to capture the institutions and then everything will be great. I don't want the institutions. Okay, I mean, if people do, that's great, but that's not why I do what I do. When you're never, we don't want the majority because, like Metzger said, even if we had them, what the hell would we do with these people? You hung around these people lately, like you know, what's that going to accomplish? You know, look at yourself as a vanguardist. Think, you know, it sounds like really gay, but, you know, think globally, act locally. That's not just like a dumb cliche that like commies and fucking woke types invoke. It's actually true. You know, be aware of historically impactful events, you know, and on your people and think about this in, you know, in deep culture terms, but in terms of how you lead your own life, you know, connect with other vanguardists, you know, build like an intimate social circle of people, you know, who you can, you know, live life with, practice your culture with, raise kids with, and things like that. I mean, that's the way forward, man. You know, and it's the way forward is not, you know, I'm gonna get 100 million followers on social media and like convince people, you know, to like some fucking like hot take I had on why like pro-abortionists are fucked up assholes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it reminds me of when that Vanity Fair article came out talking about Molebug and NRX, and it was kind of this big high that a lot of people got saying that, look, we're becoming mainstream, the Overton window shifting. I'm of the belief that it shouldn't take that article for you to feel the winning momentum. Like you guys said earlier, you know, the focusing on your own life and your own family, you know, that is the judgment for how well you're doing. And, you know, obviously we want things to go in a more positive direction in a mainstream sense, but I don't, like you said, we're not trying to strictly win over the institutions in a sense. There's a lot more personal things being done.
Well, it's also too, it's like, look, if Vanity Fair is identifying you as the dissident right, you're a fucking poser, like 100%. That's like being declared by Rolling Stone to be like the cool band. It's like,
yeah.
It's like, okay, so Bread Mold is like this like nerdy Jewish liberal is like, you know, oh, he's like this bad guy. But it's like, meanwhile, like me and my friends all get deplatformed. Huh, that's interesting.
If Vanity Fair ever praises me, I'm deleting my website. And
I'm gonna commit suicide because like I'll realize like my whole life has been like a fucking lie and a waste. But yeah, bread mold, like bread mold. That's a heavy fucking right wing badass there.
So well, speaking on the Rolling Stone aspect, as far as like a good like metric system, one of the things that somebody in my chat yesterday was hyping mad about was one thing, Matt, that catches my eyes, you get into the culture of things. And, a lot of people on this side, they're really stuck on political theory, philosophy, political analysis. And I don't think that stuff is useless, obviously, but I do see there's this big vacuum for a lot of the culture stuff. And I think they're already kind of people I like are already going in that direction. And so I'm happy to see it. But do you kind of like, what's this big like delay where, people on the right, I don't know, they like walk away from it because it's liberal, or, there's definitely, as Billy Pratt said, there's a way to be culturally relevant like the left and have that right wing analysis. But what I don't know, why is it so rare for people on the right to just compete in that market space of art?
I mean, I've got my own ideas on that, and then I'll give it over to you and Matt. I mean, I know you just indicated that like he spent too much time on theoretical abstraction, but and I'm about to do that, so forgive me, but it's essential to the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
The right wing perspective since 1933 has been socially unacceptable, and since 1949, it's been, in practical terms, illegal. So if you're going to put out a right wing product, whether you're a polemicist, whether you're an artist, whether you're a philosophic novelist, if you're at all interested in getting over in the mainstream, you're constantly self-criticizing as to like whether this is ideologically compliant. You're like a playwright was in the former German Democratic Republic. I'm not being hysterical or using hyperbole. Like, that's what it's like. If you're on the left, basically you can say whatever the hell you want. You can literally say whatever you want as long as you're not advocating pedophilia or attacking Jewish people. Other than that, you can literally say anything you want. So, I mean, that's why. So if you're on the right, you're constantly saying like, how do I comply with, the strictures of the guiding political theology without being canceled, while at the same time, presenting myself as edgy enough to be impactful. Like, that's why, so these guys are walking on a tightrope. I mean, I don't, you can do one of two things. Like, you can either abandon any pretension of changing the conceptual paradigm, or you can do what I do and just like not give a fuck. But, obviously if you work a 9-to-5 job or something, or if like, your kids are in public school, that's probably not a real appealing thing to do what I do to people. But, well, I mean, if you're gonna participate in the system and insinuate your fortunes into it in those kinds of critical ways, don't complain about it that you've got to play ball with. I mean, harsh as that might sound, and I know people can turn around and be like, well, you're a single man. Okay, fine. But I know plenty of guys who got wives and kids who do what I do. I mean, it's, life's all making sacrifices.
I think the issue is trying to start out with trying to communicate a message first before trying to come and create something entertaining. The most effective, I guess you could use the term propaganda coming from the left, usually doesn't start from that premise. Usually they try to make something entertaining first and then make it propagandistic. Because anything that's overly propagandist from a left-wing perspective usually gets rejected from the audience. And we're seeing that now because they've become too comfortable with their own cant, that they've become pushing out stuff that's overly, too LGBT or whatever, that the audience has started rejecting it. They've become way too comfortable with their own power. But they weren't initially like that from like the 60s forward. They focused on being entertaining and then put the message in afterwards. Right-wing artists, will put the cart before the horse. If you're trying to create, I guess, a right-wing message or whatever, focus on being entertaining first, and then if you have biases or whatever, it'll seep in afterwards. I don't consider Terror House to be an explicitly political project. I consider it an apolitical project. We just happen to publish a lot of right-wingers. We publish some left-wing type people. We publish people who are apolitical. I focus on, is this entertaining? Is this well written? And as a result, we have some, writers who are right wing and have been censored by other type, other presses that wouldn't dare touch them. One of the writers that we've focused a lot on is Andy Nowicki. In fact, we have his new novel Muse that we're publishing next week. He's a writer who's been harassed by the ADL, the SPLC. He's been smeared. He's actually been visited by the FBI under false pretenses. He's a fantastic novelist, because he doesn't go in and try to be, he has a YouTube channel where he has his political views and whatnot. But when he's writing fiction, he doesn't explicitly try to propagandize. He writes an entertaining story. His work isn't to everyone's taste. And then, he expresses a political viewpoint after he's made an entertaining story. And I think that's what makes his work gel. That's what makes it really effective.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah. I thought the other day, what we were talking about the production code not long ago, Ace, you and I were, and the film that really kind of tested before it was formally repealed, the film that really tested whether or not it was still being enforced was The Pawnbroker with Rod Steiger. Like, that was the first film. It's a Holocaust propaganda piece, but it was also the first non-pornographic movie, and there were blue movie loop that showed full frontal female nudity. So there was and that was the big kind of selling point. Oh wow, this is really lurid, titillating stuff. So that's what got people in the theater. Was nude girls. But then the whole film is this kind of narrative about the Third Reich was a satanically evil regime, and Holocaust, and the martyrdom of the Jewish people, and this is why the Zionist cause is essential. I mean, which is of course incredibly timely, because that's when Israel was waging these ethnic cleansing wars against their enemies. But yeah, if to Matt's point, if the Pawnbroker had been sold as some kind of hard and fast story about Jews in Poland, nobody would have gone to see the thing. I mean, yeah, that's a very on the nose example, but I do his point too. That's why nobody watches Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live has all the humor value of an old Pravda magazine, talking about Amerikansky Reagan and how capitalism mean no bread. It's the opposite of funny. It's you can't make. I mean, it's funny because it's so not funny. But yeah. So that's an important point.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that unites a lot of us unites the anyways, but it kind of unites a lot of people on our side. The sort of the gonzo journalism route seems to be another, and that that came from something that's far from the right, you know what I mean? So it's a bit ironic, kind of adapting to some of these genres that are definitely speak to our audiences and resonate, artistically with a lot of people on our side. It seems like it's funny that these avenues that people write off as, they're unsalvageable because a lot of the people at the wheel are leftists. It doesn't have to be that way if you follow Matt's advice. Our artistic value comes before messaging, and so yeah, I think that's the path forward. I think that's a lot of what a lot of people are doing.
And it's also, just let me say, I got to bounce in a minute. I'm sorry to cut this short, but I got it. I said, I got a late start today because I'm getting over being ill. But because we are a Vanguardist movement, what our cultural product is going to be weird. Okay, it's going to be weird in the way early black metal was. It's going to be weird in the way golden age science fiction was in the 40s and 50s. You've got to be okay with being weird. Okay, that's. Yeah, I mean, again, if you're looking to build a mass entertainment brand, you're not going to accomplish that insinuating truly philosophically right-wing content into it. And again, too, it's why would you want to? You want the Mall of America, but with only white people, or you want the Democratic Party, but without homos? I don't. What are you trying to accomplish? I don't. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. I mean, I'm trying to get the truth of what actually happened in history out there, and I'm trying to protect the posterity of my own people, and our own concept of where we're historically situated. I'm not trying to get 20 million people to buy something I wrote. That would never happen, but you understand what I mean. But this has been a great conversation, man, and I hope we can do this again with Matt. I really appreciate you hosting me, Ace, as I always do, and I appreciate getting the chance to talk to you, Matt. If you wanted to appear on the podcast, Ace and I do at some point, that would be dope. Probably in a month's time would be ideal. Don't feel pressured, but I'd appreciate that. And I'm a big fan of Terror House, and I will plug your stuff on my page.
Man.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
cool.
And I'll hit you up later this evening or tomorrow morning, Ace. And thanks again.
Yeah, I want to get this to you, Thomas. Someone sent in 1999. Thank you, EH. He said, "I'm late, Thomas. The last thing you dropped with Pete was absolutely fire. Bless you, brother. Incredible shite. I downloaded Substack just to follow your stuff. Thank you." So
No, thank you, man. That's a great that's a great honor. I really mean it. The overwhelmingly positive response to what Pete Canones and I have been doing is really incredible, and especially all the kind words people have been dropping. I'm really moved by that. That's really great. But yeah, thank you, fellas. This has been really outstanding, and we'll catch up soon.
yeah, where can people follow you? Because I know people are kind of
Yeah,
out of the loop because of
you
Twitter.
can find me on Substack. They've never censored anything I've written, and I don't think that'll change. I will always be there unless something changes. You can find me at REAL Thomas 777 one word .substack.com. You can find me on Telegram. We got a really good community there. The T-Gram mob. T.me/the number 7 HOMAS 777. That's the best place to find me. And through Telegram, if you want to contact me directly, you can do that. Just direct message me there, and I'll pass an email on to you.
Awesome. And Matt too.
Yeah, you can. Terror House Press is terrorhousepress.com. You can buy all our books there. They're also on Amazon and other booksellers. Terror House Magazine is terrorhousemag.com. We publish that new Stuart Stories poems every day. And of course, we're on Twitter, twitter.com/terrorhousemag. Instagram.com/terrorhousemag. Telegram is t.me/terrorhouse. And as for me personally, my website is mattforney.com. I usually, you can find all of my personal stuff there. And I do have a Telegram channel at t.me/mattforney for my personal stuff there. You can follow me there.
Nice. I'll do a double take to make sure we didn't miss any questions. If anybody had anything else. Oh, the author Matt was talking about at the start of the show. Who was that? A cross between
Richard Power. He wrote Letters from a Heartbroken Pervert. That was the first book we ever published. You can buy it from our website. You can also find it on Amazon and other booksellers. That's Letters from a Heartbroken Pervert by Richard Power.
Gotcha. And that's no problem, EH. Thank you for asking. And Spinley, thank you too. All right, we're wrapping up. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Appreciate having some like-minded people on the podcast. It's always an honor. 100%. Yeah, Oro knows what's up. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back soon enough this summer, and have a great rest of your evening.